Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Nancy Pelosi, the daughter of the boss of Baltimore, is between a rock and a hard place. Does she protect those vulnerable members of her caucus in the next election, or does she satisfy the radicals who are screaming for impeachment? She's going to be talking about that not too long during this day. But are you ready? And that's the question Nancy Pelosi asked before launching into the next round of impeachment hearings. And so the circus continues. Who warned Democrats that they haven't made their case? And how did the president's teenage son get dragged into this mess in a moment that went viral? Jenna Browder has the story from Washington.
The Judiciary Committee opened its hearings with testimony from legal scholars on whether the charges against President Trump rise to the level of impeachment. Democrats called 3 witnesses. Republicans got 1.
If what we're talking about is not impeachable, then nothing is impeachable.
The scholars brought in by Democrats say the Ukraine scandal is evidence President Trump abused his power for his own personal political gain, and that he should be impeached.
President Trump's conduct, as described in the testimony and evidence, clearly constitutes impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors under the Constitution.
Republicans were allowed to call one of their own experts. Professor Jonathan Turley made it clear he didn't vote for the president, and while he didn't defend him, he did say Democrats are moving too fast and have not proven their case.
It's wrong because this is not how you impeach an American president. Why you want to set the record for the fastest impeachment? Fast is not good for impeachment.
Some Democrats asked questions referencing the Mueller report, a sign they may broaden impeachment beyond Ukraine. And then there was this moment that went viral.
The Constitution says there can be no titles of nobility. So while the president can name his son Baron, he can't make him a baron.
Let me also suggest that when you invoke the president's son's name here, when you try to make a little joke out of referencing Baron Trump, that does not lend credibility to your argument. It makes you look mean.
Professor Pamela Carlin later apologized.
It was wrong of me to do that.
Overseas at NATO, President Trump called the hearing boring and criticized its fairness.
They get 3 constitutional lawyers and we get 1. What's that all about?
CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody, says Democrats botched the hearing and didn't break any new ground.
And when it's partisan like this, and you want to move public opinion, you can't be more partisan. You have to somehow figure out a way to get more public on your side. I didn't do that.
And a full House vote is expected before Christmas. And reportedly, the administration is gearing up for a full defense in a January Senate trial. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
You know, the danger of what's going on, ladies and gentlemen, this means that any president of any party, for almost any reason, can be subject to an impeachment, which means that the election will be continuously in turmoil over and over again. The will of the people would be overthrown because of a few people in the House of Representatives bringing a vendetta. And it's so dangerous what they're doing. And I think, as I said at the beginning, Nancy Pelosi has got to choose. All right, if you have vulnerable members of your caucus and they come before the electorate and the people say, what have you done? Did you work for infrastructure? No. Did you do anything for defense? No. Did you work on a balanced budget? No. Did you do something for foreign policy? No. Well, what did you do? Well, we spent time on a fruitless impeachment. Now, that is going to mean the defeat of as many as 40 members of the House of Representatives who are on the Democratic side. On the other hand, there are these vocal people who are just clamoring to destroy Trump. They're Trump haters. They hate what he's done, and they think he's illegitimate, and they think he should leave the presidency. And so she's stuck between those two, and we're waiting momentarily for her public announcement. But she's a pretty savvy pal, but I don't know if she's going to sacrifice her people to please the vocal critics or not. Well, in other news, on a stealth offensive, what is Iran secretly building up in Iraq? John Jessup has the answer from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Pat, Iran is putting short-range ballistic missiles in Iraq. That's according to U.S. military and intelligence sources in the New York Times. The paper reporting it's part of Iran's efforts to intimidate the Middle East and assert its regional power. Discussing the threat with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the people of Iran and neighboring nations are tiring of the Islamic regime.
In this time where there are anti-Iran protests taking place in Baghdad, anti-Iranian protests taking place in Beirut, and we all know what's going on in Iran itself. These are people that are seeking freedom and a reasonable way to live, and they recognize the threat that is posed by the kleptocrats that are running the Islamic Republic of Iran.
At the recent NATO summit, President Trump said the United States, Pat, stands with the protesters in Iran.
You know, words are interesting, but actions speak louder than words. And I do think it's time for the United States to get real and get those protesters some serious armament, some help, weapons, and all the other things they need. That regime has got to go. And now is the time it's so vulnerable. But the Iranians are stirring up trouble all over the Middle East. And if they've got some kind of, nuclear devices in their arsenal, it's dangerous. And the Israelis feel it, and others feel it, but it's not enough to say, we stand with you. Well, that's nice. You're standing with me, but how about giving me a gun to shoot? John?
Pat, another Middle East crisis addressed at the NATO summit, the role of Turkey and the strain it's putting on the alliance. Citing the invasion of Syria and its cooperation with Russia, some say it's time for Turkey to go. But as Chris Mitchell reports, the regime still has strong support from President Trump.
Turkey joined NATO in 1952, but during the NATO meetings, French President Macron wondered whether Turkey should continue to be part of the alliance.
How is it possible to be a member of the alliance, to work with all of us, to buy our materials, to be integrated, and to buy the S-400 from Russia?
Earlier, Macron said NATO suffered brain death in part because President Trump pulled out of Syria without consulting his NATO allies, and because of Turkey's invasion of northeast Syria.
When I look at Turkey, they now are fighting against those who fight with us, who fought with us, shoulder to shoulder against ISIS. And sometimes they work with ISIS proxies. This is an issue, and this is a strategic issue.
Yet during the summit, President Trump defended Turkey.
Well, I can only say we have a very good relationship with Turkey and with President Erdogan. I do.
Middle East expert Seth Frantzman believes Turkey came to the summit with a strategy.
It tried to kind of blackmail NATO and say, we're not going to approve any other things that NATO's doing unless you agree with what we're doing in Syria.
Frantzman says President Erdogan saw President Trump as an ally.
I think Turkey went there kind of expecting Donald Trump and the U.S. administration to be very sympathetic, because it's kind of cast a spell over the administration by claiming that the former administration under Obama had not given it Patriot missiles and things like that, and therefore Turkey has a right to buy Russian missiles.
Many have criticized Erdogan's invasion of northeast Syria after atrocities like this one, where Turkish-backed soldiers killed 12, including 8 children, in a mortar attack. It's why Kurdish protesters took to the streets of London during the summit.
NATO is still supporting him. The UK is still selling arms to him. America is still supporting him, and we need help because we don't have any power ourselves.
Some believe Erdogan's strategy is to hold European leaders hostage with the threat of flooding the continent with millions of refugees, while at the same time pursuing his goal of ethnic cleansing along the Turkish-Syrian border. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. Pat, back to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm at a loss to understand what our president is thinking. Erdogan is a thug. He has killed members of the military who were opposing him. He's killed members of the legislature who were opposing him. He has viciously killed our Kurdish allies and given the Syrians to himself and the Russians. This whole thing is wrong. What is wrong with the president? He's really missed it on this one, and it kind of makes me sad as we see all the other problems that America is facing, that we would be allied with a thug of this magnitude and trying to defend him when he should be sanctioned, and if there's any possibility, and it's very hard to do, he should be rid out of NATO, because we don't need a so-called ally like him. John?
Pat, back here at home, one lawmaker is waging war on wasteful government spending. Oklahoma Senator James Lankford says even though the government is collecting more tax revenue than any other time in history, America is still drowning in debt. The overall deficit stands at $23 trillion right now, and Lankford warns that could sink our economy.
We're approaching a time where it would take the income of every single American for the entire year to be collected as taxes to pay off our debt.
Lankford's office has put out its latest annual federal fumbles report, documenting what it calls foolish federal spending, including a nearly $2 million study on sea lions in Russia and a $600,000 documentary on Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. The senator suggested just cutting out all the government's wasteful spending could save tens of billions of dollars a year. Pat?
Folks, the federal debt is going out of control. And Senator Lankford has done us a great service to show the incredible things they're spending money. It's not their money, it's your money, it's taxpayer money, and we are burdening the next generation with insupportable debt. And it is my feeling that this debt burden, the trillions and trillions of dollars that is being heaped up, is going to become like a mountain that's going to fall upon us, and we will not be able to survive. And this government that we're used to having as a sort of a piggy bank for everybody is going to collapse under the weight of this debt. And if we ever have to start paying market rates on our debt, there will not be any money in the federal government for anything. There won't be enough for the welfare. There won't be enough for old age support. There won't be enough for the military. We'll be constrained, and we won't be able to be the kind of country we have enjoyed. Sooner or later, it's going to come due. You cannot overspend the way we're doing. It is reckless, unbelievable. I mean, to spend millions of dollars on studying sea lions and to have some kind of a tribute to Joseph Stalin. Who ever heard of such nonsense? John?
Pat, the political crisis may be shaking up Washington, but in states across the country, the ground is really quaking. Thousands of minor earthquakes have struck the United States in recent months. Could these quake swarms be leading up to a catastrophic event? Or, as Paul Strand reports, could they be a blessing, saving us from major disaster?
More than 100,000 aftershocks have rumbled California since a 4th of July quake hit the Mojave Desert, followed by a 7.1 the next day.
I mean, everything was moving. The walls were just moving, everything.
In October, 5 large earthquakes shook the Pacific off the Oregon coast. Worrisome since that's home to the Cascadia subduction zone. Important because it could someday unleash what's likely to be America's deadliest natural disaster on everything west of Interstate 5. Scientist Jeff Zwirink at California's Reasons to Believe Institute says it's no surprise there's so much action on the West Coast.
You just look around the whole Pacific Ocean. That area is just surrounded by tectonic plates that are moving and sliding over one another.
And while he thinks California is prepared well for its inevitable quakes, 9 out of 10 commercial buildings and 8 out of 10 homes there still have no earthquake insurance.
We're going to have a lot more earthquakes, and we're going to have a lot stronger shaking.
Dr. Jones estimates if that Mojave Desert quake had hit L.A. instead, it might have cost $200 billion in damages. Elsewhere, more than 140 quakes hit Oklahoma just in October. But they may have an interesting origin.
Small-scale earthquakes that it looks like are human-caused. Some of that's related to the way we're drilling for oil down there.
But he doesn't find the swarms of quakes around the U.S. at all surprising.
There's some stuff in the Midwest, Missouri area, the New Madrid Fault. There's obviously stuff along the California coast. These are just places where we expect tectonic activity to happen.
Zwirink says no seismologist can really say whether these swarms will lead to the big one many fear.
As plates move, there's going to be energy built up there. And so in some sense, this a whole bunch of small earthquakes may be better than a bunch, or a couple of larger ones, because you kind of dissipate that energy little bits at a time instead of having one big one that releases all the energy.
This man of science and faith says, don't let excessive fear eat you up.
You exaggerate it and say, oh, we're in imminent danger of having this big one that's going to wipe out humanity. Just as a Christian, I see it's best to be aware of what's going on, be adequately prepared and knowledgeable of it, but not make it a bigger deal than it is.
His other recommendation, do everything FEMA advises in its When the Earth Shakes video, and you should be good to go.
Are your emergency kits packed? What about your family, your friends? Do they know what to do, how to get in touch, and where to meet?
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Some good advice there. Pat, back to you.
It really is. We've been talking about this so-called Ring of Fire, but we have the North American plate that we're on, and we have the Pacific plate, and those are rubbing together, and the Ring of Fire is where they join all the way around. You see that right there on that map. You've got all the way down to San Diego, you've got Lima, you got Acapulco, then you got Los Angeles. And up around Seattle, that Pacific subduction zone, there have been a number of Christian people who've had revelations, they claim, that there's going to be a major disaster in the Northwest because of that thing, and it would be a tsunami of major proportions. If that subduction zone collapses, it would lead to a huge tidal wave that would move across Oregon. It would be tragic and a disaster. And as I say, people have had some sort of revelations about that one. But we also know what happened in Alaska. We've seen what happened down in South America. And those plates, the Earth is just moving, and it looks like it's starting to move a lot more. But isn't that what Jesus said? Before the end times, there will be earthquakes.
You hear so much about the West Coast. I didn't realize how much activity there was just in the body of the United States.
Well, that New Madrid thing, it was a collapse there, and the Mississippi River started running uphill, and church bells were ringing in Boston because of an earthquake that took place in that New Madrid fault area. So it's all over, folks. But anyhow, that's the planet we live on, whether you like it or not. Those plates move. That's the way the Earth came together. So, but the Lord did say before He came back there'd be earthquakes in diverse places. And there they are.